Hello, and welcome to the third presentation of the Fall 2016 season of the Medical History Interest Group. I'm Melissa Nasia. This presentation is sponsored by Lapis Library History Collections and the Department of Bioethics and Interdisciplinary Studies. If you haven't already done so, please sign the attendance sheet. We have one more presentation for this season. On Monday, November 14th, Bioterror, Something Wicked This Way Comes, and the presenters will be John M. Lehman, Ph.D., BSOM, and Bobby M. Collins, DDS, SODM. Today's presentation is the first standardized produced orthodontic appliance, the expansion arch, 1899 to 1910. Our presenter is V. Wallace McCarlie, M.A., D.M.D., Ph.D., Cert Ortho, School of Dental Medicine. We have a number of current exhibits. On the second floor, there's a seasonal mini exhibit in the display cabinet next to the elevator, and it's titled Something Wicked This Way Comes, appropriate for Halloween. And then the other exhibits are all on this floor. Vesalius in the Art of the Human Form on the fourth floor display cabinets. Lemons for Lemonade by Jeffrey Stroud, and this is part of the Arts as Avocation series on the fourth floor wall. And Bausch & Lomb microscopes, 1884 to 1972, in that display cabinet. Here is Wally McCarlie to speak on the first standardized produced orthodontic appliance, the expansion arch, 1899 to 1910.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate the introduction. Glad to be here. Glad to see Dr. Savitt here. We saw each other, I think, as we got our flu vaccines the other day. But I'm delighted to be with the distinguished guests and colleagues and friends that are here today. And also for those who will be able to watch this later on, delighted to have you learn a little bit about what was called the expansion arch. And I know it doesn't seem that exciting of a word or a term, but we're going to talk a little bit about that today. It was extremely important in the specialty of orthodontics within the profession of dentistry. And as you see on this screen here, the very first page, this is part of it. This is really the core of it in terms of the mechanism. And we're going to talk about it a little bit later in more detail. So just an outline for the lecture today. What we're going to talk about is some of the important tooth regulating patents that Dr. Edward H. Engel had, and especially those that dealt with the expansion arch specifically. We're also going to follow Engel as he develops his working and business relationships for the expansion arch, and we'll take just this little bit of a journey with him and get a kind of an on-the-ground sense of Engel's up and down but dogged persistence as a business person as he worked with these manufacturers. And also S.S. White was both the manufacturer and also the distributor of his system, his appliances that he invented. And finally, we'll show some current research that we've done. Actually, 2 research assistants that have worked with me for a full 2 years. We've got some summary data. We don't have all of it for you today, but we'll show you some never before seen summary graphs in terms of what this all meant financially for Dr. Engel and how it kind of progressed over a decade period. So that's where we're going today. Dr. Engel was born in 1855 in Pennsylvania, served as a dental apprentice, and graduated in 1878. I've given another lecture on a different facet of his life a few years ago in this same lecture series, and you may find that on the website, and you can find out a lot more about how he viewed education, dental education and specifically how the specialty of orthodontics started. What we're going to really focus on today are some of these inventions that he created. And we'll look at the patent from March 5th, 1889, his very first patent, and we'll also look at a few others that you see here listed. But the important, the kind of the culminating invention for him really came on June 6th, 1899, and that was actually what he called the expansion arch, and I'm going to explain why he called it the expansion arch and what that was about just a little bit. So this is the first patent that Dr. Engel secured, and it doesn't look like much, but basically it's a little metal band that fits around a tooth, and then soldered to that together. It has a fixed part of the assembly, and then there's basically a sliding tube within a bored out hole of that fixed part of the assembly, and then that attaches to the other tooth. And basically with a nut, the nut that had a little bit of a screw mechanism, you turn the nut, literally, that's all you do. You turn the nut, and it can either pull or push on the tooth, thereby either expanding or bringing the tooth back to where you would like it. And so this was his first patent in March of 1889, and the reason why I show this to you is it pertains to the June 6th, 1899 patent that he refers to this, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but this was really the beginning of this. And other people had done similar things, but the key is the mechanism here. And you can't really see the mechanism in this illustration, but we're going to move on and look at a few other appliances, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, you know, what's interesting is, of all the appliances and all of the things that Dr. Engel was doing, he really wanted to learn how to expand the dental arch. Okay, we've learned a lot since then, but in his time, as you can see here, diagrammatically represented, we have a lot of rotated and crowded teeth, and so to get those teeth out, if you will, to extend the arch, to expand the arch, there has to be a way to push on those. And he created this little ingenious little way where he created these little notches, just small, in the wire. If you look at figure 3 here, you can see that there is the original arch wire. Well, he would, and if you look up at figure 1, assuming that now is soldered, that wire is soldered to 2 metal bands that have been wrapped around those canines, what he did is he actually created also, he patented a set of pliers to then squeeze the wire, and then as you squeeze the wire, you push the body, the mass of the wire, away from each other on both sides. And so thereby extending or lengthening the wire, and thereby creating a force, expanding the arch and pushing those teeth away from each other, and thereby relieving some of the crowding that had existed. And so that happened in 1895. These are a few of the dental pliers. I'm not showing you the dental pliers that he patented that would actually squeeze those wires, but this is just one example of some other pliers that he created. And as you can see diagrammatically represented, you can see, let's say, probably the best place is in figure 3, where you can see on the back surface or the lingual surface of the tooth, he's cinching down on this soft metal, and then he'll crimp it, okay, and then that then assured that it would adapt to the tooth perfectly. So he was working hard and doing all of these things, and then in June 6, 1899, he secured the tooth regulating device patent that really forever changed orthodontics and really brought orthodontics into the new century. and really lifted orthodontics from something that general dentists were doing kind of in a haphazard and unorganized and kind of specific way, just kind of randomly, if you will. This device is kind of that moment in time that signals that things have changed. And what's interesting is, and you may not see it here because it's a little small, but what's interesting about this is that he applied for this patent on October 24th, today, 1898, 118 years ago to the day. And I didn't plan that, but I got a kick out of that as I looked more closely into that. Apropos that we're talking about this today, and so if you look at Figure 1, what you see is you basically see, and it's hard to see the details, the machine details of this what we called and what he called the expansion arch. And I'll tell you in a minute why he called it that. But actually, it's threaded. The entire, semicircle arch is threaded, along the entire arch. And the original assembly that he referred to in March of 1889, he's actually improved it a little bit, and he's put it onto this arch. And that's what made this appliance different than just a piece of metal in a semicircle arch, basically. And so the mechanism, as it's shown in Figure 3 and 4 and 5 here, you can see that it's bored out in the middle. You can see kind of the threads, if you look closely, the threads of the arch wire. And the same idea here is that what you wanted to do is you wanted to screw it down in tension. And you could either contract or expand, depending on which way you wanted to go. You could actually put the screw in different places to do that. And so it's interesting that what happened is, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but someone a little bit later on basically made a very similar appliance here with this very similar mechanism. And Dr. Engel took them to court for patent infringement, and he won. And it was really interesting to read the decision, the legal decision. But what happened was, very simply, if it's really hard to see here, but in Figure 5, kind of in the area between A2 and the lower B, there's a little area for a little bit of a jacket there that's inserted, that slipped into the mechanism. And so what that did is, now this was a little bit later, what that did is that as the teeth moved to different areas, and what would happen, he had a problem, Dr. Engel, then the tension that existed when you first put it in now released. And what happened is that the nut would unscrew a little bit, and then you would lose what you were trying to do. And so this little ingenious little, basically a little sleeve of metal helped that when the tension was released and in between visits, the nut would not come loose. And so you would hold the position that you were at the time. And so that was the reason why the judge ruled that the other person had actually infringed upon Dr. Engel's invention, because indeed they determined that created it different enough where that was an infringement. And so, very interesting. Well, he creates this appliance. He's been doing this been doing orthodontics for a few decades now. And we're almost to the turn of the century, 1900, it's 1899. And what happens is that earlier you saw that in 1895, S.S. White Dental Manufacturing Company was a huge dental manufacturing company, especially at the turn of the last century. And they really had, I don't know if they had a monopoly, but they certainly had a very large market share of all kinds of dental materials and supplies and equipment and inventions. And what happened is, as he gained these patents, secured these patents, and as he came up with the E-arch, people recognized how special it was, how interesting it was. People that had really started to try to do more orthodontics in their practices as general dentists, and they recognized the importance of this, and S.S. White became the sole agent distributor for the expansion arch. Well, turns out that Dr. Engel's wife, his first wife, her brother, his name was John E. Canning, and he was actually a very good machinist. And Engel and him, Engel owned this manufacturing plant, and John Canning was the machinist, and he was able to produce for a decade and a half leading up to this period all of the appliances, do all of the things that Engel needed to treat his patients and to basically experiment, to fiddle, to learn what worked and what didn't. But at this point in time in 1899, what happens is he can't keep up with the demand. John Canning in this small manufacturing plant basically cannot machine all of the demand. It exceeded their capacity at this point. And so Engel had to look for manufacturers that could work with him and help him in his inventions and produce this on a much more massive scale than had previously been done. And he found the Hardinge brothers in Chicago, and this is Henry Hardinge. And interestingly enough, he never worked with Henry. In fact, Henry, from 1890 to about 1908, Henry was about 1890, 95, I believe, and so his brother Franklin Hardinge. By the way, they were both engineers from Canada originally. Very, very bright and very ingenious. And Franklin is the person, Henry's brother, is the person that Dr. Engel worked with directly, communicated with him directly in these various letters at the time. And Franklin actually was a watchmaker, and he was able to do very detailed and technical work. But so what happened is that Dr. Engel was able to visit their manufacturing plant in Chicago and was just blown over by and impressed by the sophistication, some of the new automation. Of course, they still had people there, working as well, machinists working around the clock. And this company was doing all kinds of things. Orthodontics was probably the least of which they were doing, probably a kind of a strange specialized niche, so to speak, but that's what was happening. And so, but I'm going to take you along kind of this personal journey that Dr. Engel had with this company and others. It was up and down, to be honest, and we're going to kind of see what happens. And so, May 27th, 1899, the demand exceeds his capacity. He asks the Hardinge brothers for a quote, and in June he agrees to have them manufacture 5,000 wire arches. Interestingly enough, they didn't want to take his original. He wanted them to do 3,000. He felt 5,000 was too many at the time. They said, no, we will only do 5,000, and he ended up accepting that. But a little bit later in June, he also requests that they do a little research for him because they said, hey, we want to do it a little differently than you're telling us. You see, he had a ton of experience in doing this, and he had done this personally, directly, in his own manufacturing plant, albeit small, for a decade and a half before this point. And so what happened was he said, listen, there was a lateral spring in a particular wire from the center point that he wanted to keep that spring in the wire. He didn't want to lose that. And with the process that they were suggesting to manufacture this particular wire, he felt that they would lose that spring. And he said, okay, if you want to do a little R&D, go right ahead. But I want to keep that, the springiness that I have in the wire, I need that, and I can't have you lose that. And so that was the kind of the beginning of this relationship. Well, after 4 months, Hardinge does not deliver on the initial order yet, and Dr. Engel is a little disappointed, and so he writes them another letter, and he does end up getting an order, but it's incorrect, and he didn't send them the things that he asked for, but they sent him the things that he didn't approve yet, and so it was an interesting kind of start to this journey of his. And so there really were, as I've read, basically hundreds and really thousands of pages of this at this point. If you look at this kind of architectural schematic, they maybe were on the ground floor and they had that expectation, and he was on the upper level and he had a totally different expectation. And so you see this back and forth in these letters and whatnot. And just as an example, in this particular case, they send after Engel lets them know some of his disappointment, that they didn't manufacture the things to the specs that he had specified. They say that the original contract that they had agreed upon, that it wasn't enough money to do what they were being asked to do, and so he doesn't exactly love that, but he says, okay, well, maybe, if provided that the work meets my standards. And so that's kind of how this is going along. But again, his first impression of Franklin Hardinge and of the plant, both the machinery in the plant and the workers in the plant and what they were doing, all kinds of different projects, he was so impressed with all of that even after all of this, you can see the quote on the screen. He said, "I should prefer giving you contracts, provided you will," and this is really interesting. I mean, this gives you a real sense of Engel's personality. "Provided you will immediately bend your energies to produce the best possible results." So he's not yielding. He's not giving one millimeter, in this saga here. Well, it kind of gets worse again, and so they come back and they say, we need more money, and he actually paid them more money, and he went back and forth, and he said, okay, I'll give a little bit, you give a little bit. Okay, let's see if he really showed a willingness to work with these companies, but it was out of necessity, because the demand is just flowing in now at this point, and he cannot keep up. So he's just out of survival mode. He's really just doing whatever he can to survive, to keep up with the demand. But he writes, "To change your price from the original and increase 1,300, almost 1,400% is a showing most remarkable on an already accepted order, and I must say has jarred my faith in your business methods." So you can see where this is going, and some of the challenges of this manufacturing company and this sole private inventor that made a huge splash in dental medicine and really founded the specialty of orthodontics. So what he does 7 days later, literally, this is a rebound letter. Okay, this is a rebound letter. He writes to another person that apparently he had become acquainted with, named William Hahn, in the same city of Chicago. And he says, "Listen, I need you to," he had reached out to him, he had spoken with him, and then he writes this letter. He says, and it's a long letter, and he says, "These are all the things I need from you, and I need you to do it well." And he goes on, and it's just like reading the original letters from Hardinge. He gives them all these extremely specific specifications, what needs to be done, that they need to give him a sample, that he needs to approve the sample and come back and do all of this. And now he's getting a little bit more bold because of his experience with Hardinge, and he says, listen, I know what I know, for I have been doing this for 14 years already. I have spent thousands of dollars of my own money in experimenting, so please let me tell you how to do it. Just do what I tell you to do, is basically what he's telling William Hahn. And it's very interesting kind of what happens. Well, as you might expect, this is, as you might expect, now January, a month later, the letters are getting a little bit more stronger from Engel to Hardinge, and he says, as you failed to fix any special date for delivery of goods, I was compelled to place orders with 2 other firms. And so he already has. One of those is William Hahn, and they're producing a lot for him because, again, he's doing this, he's in survival mode. He can't do it himself. He knows what needs to be done. He already has the patents. He already has the distributor, but he needs the manufacturer. He needs someone who can produce a lot of this stuff in a short amount of time to these very demanding specifications. So a little bit later in the same month, he gets a little bit stronger now with Hardinge and says that he's kept his part of the contract, even though that he's been disgusted beyond measure and damaged of no small sum of money. So you see, they were asking him for more money, he's giving them more money, and they're still not really, he's still not pleased with what's happening. Now, I don't want to throw this company under the bus because they were a good company. I think it was very difficult to work with Dr. Engel because this was something totally different from what they were used to doing. And he had already done this for a decade and a half. He had a very specific idea of how it needed to be done. And he wanted to keep the price point very low. So not only had they not given him things that in some cases didn't meet his standards. By the way, there were things that did meet his standards that they produced, and he was, when that happened, he was very complimentary. So there was a balanced approach here. But he was just absolutely livid about them trying to raise the prices on him. And he simply said, I'm sending you the stuff back because it's not to my specifications and I'm not going to pay for it because of that, because that's a violation of the contract. And so he would nicely say, I'll send it back, and if you do X, Y, and Z and you send it back to my approval, then we're good, then we're fine, and I'm happy to pay. Now you have to also understand he would forward them a third of the contract cost at the beginning before they ever did anything. So it's not like they weren't getting anything. It's not like he was just taking advantage of them. In fact, with Hardinge, he accuses them in one letter of using his money and his ideas to experiment for different appliances, for different inventors to try to sell, do other things. I don't know how true that is, but you can imagine the lenses that he was looking through at the time given his experience. So what we find is now in Chicago, okay, and he's in St. Louis at the time, Engel is, that's where he's residing during this entire period. But in Chicago is where he finds his multiple manufacturers and suppliers. And what happens is this. So a year later, he writes to Hahn. He says, listen, I want, and actually a year before this, he said to him, I don't want you to manufacture any other orthodontic appliances for anyone else. I want you to only manufacture for me. So he was already giving, and he gave his reasons why. And now a year later, he says, listen, I'm happy with what's going on, and I want to get to the point where you're doing everything for me because of obviously some of these experiences that he had. Now, let me just clarify a point here that's very interesting though. He didn't treat Hahn's company any different than he did Hardinge. If you read the letters, he's just as demanding, he's just as painstakingly detail-oriented for anybody that, whether they're a supplier or a manufacturer. So he's acting the same way to any and all of these working and business partners that he is interacting with. Okay, well, Now he's the next month. Now this is some time has passed, and he likes the work, and he likes everything that's going on, and this gives you a sense of what's. And if I can't say enough about this quote, this gives you a great sense of his personality. Okay, he's always telling Hardinge or Hahn or any of the suppliers, get it to me fast, get it to me yesterday, get it to me now, we're running out, we don't have anything left, we need more. He's just always, it's always just a fight to get more and to do it faster and to do it better for everybody. And now that he's got Hahn tied in, now he starts saying things like, for the love, hurry up and we need those bands. We're literally, there's a letter that he writes, he says, we only have 7 bands left. We need them now, and to treat our patients and to be able to distribute worldwide. Okay? So this is what's happening. This is the journey that he's going through and experiencing. But now comes the interesting part. So now he tells Hahn, okay, in the same year, a little bit later, he says, hey, send the bills. Where are the bills? The money's just coming in now. Come on, how much do we owe you? We can pay for it now. And so you can tell there's a little bit of glee in this statement. There's a little bit of almost like he's getting it out from under all these years, decades of work and starting a specialty school of orthodontia and everything. By the way, where he did that for free for the students and all of these things. But on this side, he says, you know what? This is time to make a little bit of money, and he turns out to be a very shrewd business person, one that won't be pushed around. And with his proclivity for education and his proclivity for invention and teaching, some say that those sometimes are more mutually exclusive than they are mutually inclusive. But that's what was happening. Again, rush the work. We are getting more behind each day. We are entirely out of our expansion arches. Okay, March 16th, 2001. This is what's happening. Okay. So if we look at the graph, this is data never before seen. We've worked, like I said, 2 years to get, this is some summary data that we've worked to get. But if you look at, and again, think of that expansion arch that you saw at the beginning of the presentation. And in 1899, he sold exactly 0 of those. That's when he patented it. And so they started to sell immediately. And by 1905, he's distributing 2,500 worldwide expansion arches. And by 1910, almost 7,500. Now that's just the arch. All the parts, all the other things that go along with this that you need to treat the case are also not included in this. That's just the arch itself. Okay? That's just the arch itself, and they have about 30 parts that go along with this that you can use, and also additional appliances for other cases. And so it's in a very, very interesting, productive, extremely productive and strong period of time for all involved, for the inventor, for the specialty, for the patients, for the other dentists that are treating these patients, for the distributors, and for the manufacturers. Everybody's doing great. Everybody's having a great time, working hard, doing tremendous things. And if we look at the total revenue, now this is a total revenue of not only expansion arches, but all of the parts and the other things that he's selling. And you can see we have a very robust and strong growth here that's happening from 1899 from almost nothing to almost $60,000 annually in revenue because of these appliances. And you can see that it becomes a little bit more exponential as we reach the latter part of the decade. And so it's very interesting how this happens. Now, another little interesting point about the shrewd businessman that he was, there were people, and I can't mention all of them, and really we've just followed one thread today, one thread of the fabric of this decade of his life, that's just fascinating and so dynamic. But what you find is that we have another person that it turns out infringed on a patent of Engel's. And what happens is somehow he and Engel come together and find this out. I think that he came to Engel personally, the way that I read the letters, the way that I understand it. And he said, listen, I've got this device that I've kind of built, but someone said that it looks a lot like yours, and I kind of did know about yours and that kind of thing. And will you just let me market it? And his distributor was also S.S. White Dental Manufacturing Company. And what do you think Engel said? I mean, he wasn't going to have it. Not at all. But this is interesting, very interesting. You might think he just says, no, you cannot produce this, you cannot market this. I don't know all the back story to this particular incident, because they were both contracted with S.S. White Dental Manufacturing Company. And so that could have had something to do with the way that it turned out. But this is what happened. Engel said, I tell you what, this is the deal we're going to make. You're infringing on my patent, but if you give me 35% of royalties of everything you sell, okay, then you can go ahead and distribute it through S.S. White Dental Manufacturing Company, provided that you send it all to me first, and then I will distribute it to S.S. White. And that's what they did. That's exactly what they did. Interestingly enough, I found a letter later on where Dr. Engel is writing him a letter, not very happy because he hasn't been paid his royalties for the year. And so not only is this robust, okay, this what was termed the Engel system, which really the key of this whole system was the expansion arch. But he was getting royalties from competitors, if you will, that had, as he called them, inferior products. And the funny thing is, by having them send them to his manufacturing plant, they could test them materials, they could know exactly what it was made of, and I found other letters that he was, where people were complaining about this, and he was mentioning that, oh, well, of course that it broke, of course that happened, because he knew exactly what it was made of, that it was inferior to his product in terms of just the quality of the material, and also the mechanism was inferior and obviously in his mind. Those were the lenses that he looked through. And so these things were happening. Very interesting. And then at the same time in 1900, as this all really gets going, actually this edition over here that Melissa has for you to see, one of the old books that he wrote, he had never asked his manufacturing distributor S.S. White for any royalties on his pamphlets up to that point. But this edition in 1900 proved to be much larger, much more expansive, much more comprehensive, and he had done a tremendous amount of work. And so he argues in a letter to S.S. White for 20% of the royalties from the book. So he's doing all of this. So not only is this happening, but these other things are happening. And it's giving him an opportunity to provide orthodontic education to specialists, to get the specialty off the ground for free, to provide the Engel School for free, basically. I mean, it was an unheard of kind of situation, really. And Engel was the mastermind and the dynamo behind all of this. Really a fascinating period. This, just for fun, this was Dr. Knapp. I don't know if I mentioned his name. And we're not trying to throw anybody under the bus. He was really, I think, a skilled dentist and a knowledgeable person. But again, some of his appliances infringed upon Engel's, and these are right next to each other. SS White is still selling a little bit of this stuff. Around 1899, when Engel has his patent, most of the people switched. I found a letter that showed that Dr. Knapp's, and he was just one of a few in the market that were tinkering and playing around with stuff that had kind of been around for a long time. And I know it's hard for you to tell the differences here just in this advertisement, but there was significant differences in these appliances, and those who knew the difference, and they gravitated toward Engel's system. And interestingly enough, it was already in 1899. The Knapp market share had decreased by 50% already in 1899 at the end of 1899 as people are hearing and listening about Engel's new patent and expansion arch and his whole system. So, in conclusion, Engel was an exacting and business person to work with, and he expected those who worked with him to be dynamic and to be adaptive in their process. He expected them to work with him. He expected them to do some research. He also expected to put his hand in research. He shared with them what he knew, and they shared with him what they knew. And interestingly enough, I don't know the extent of this, but it would be very interesting to find out. But I found that some of his machinists and some of the people that he's working with, the manufacturers, they're providing him information that he didn't know. And of course, he's utilizing that information to invent new things and to do new things. And so no one lives on an island. And so we know this, and just one of the examples that we talked about today among the many were that he asked some of these manufacturers to take their losses. He would not pay for bad work, and to either take them or redo those things, or otherwise he would stop working with them and he would not pay them for the service that they had rendered, because it didn't, in his mind, fulfill the contract. We also see that he was a dogged businessman, and proved very shrewd in that. And in fact, earlier when we talked about the Hardinge case, when they raised it almost 1,400%, he just wrote it right back to them and said, "I refuse, and I'm going to pay the original contract fee, and I expect to be delivered the full order that we originally contracted for." And we also see that he allowed Dr. Knapp, who I guess instead of going to court, they had an agreement through their distributor, and Engel would receive the royalty in perpetuity. And so these qualities allowed him to not only produce profit over this decade period that was very strong, but again, it allowed him maybe to do some other things that he may not have otherwise been able to do, like providing free education to those who wanted to become the first specialists in the first specialty within dental medicine. Thank you very much for your time today.